My dad said he was proud of his kids. He was looking at my sister. Not me. I need to tell you something before anything else. Before the story, before the context, before the details that will fill in around what I just said and give it its full shape. I need to tell you that I am 34 years old. I have a doctorate in molecular biology from MIT. I run a research lab at a teaching hospital in Boston, where my team is studying early biomarkers for pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest cancers precisely because it is almost never caught early. I have published 17 peer-reviewed papers. I have 2 grants in my name. I was named to a 30 under 30 list in my field when I was 28 and thought, with some private embarrassment, that maybe my father might say something. Like and subscribe the channel, and tell us in comments from where you are watching this video. He sent a text. It said, "Good for you, Kira, Dad." That was the whole text. Good for you, Kira. Not I'm proud of you. Not even I'm proud. Good for you. Like I had parallel parked on the first try. I am telling you my credentials not to impress you. I am telling you because I need you to understand the specific texture of what I had been carrying for 34 years. The professional architecture I had built, award by award, paper by paper, grant by grant, and the space that remained, underneath all of it, where I had been waiting for 4 specific words from one specific man. I am proud of you. I waited 34 years. He said it at my sister's event. Looking at my sister. And my sister, my younger sister, who loves me, who told me what she'd heard because she couldn't carry it alone, came home that night and told me. This is day 80. My name is Kira Allen. And this is the story of what I did with that information. To understand the story, you need to understand the family. George Allen is 62 years old. He grew up in Baltimore, one of 4 sons, in a household where emotion was not a language that was spoken. Not because of cruelty, I want to be precise about this, but because of architecture. The architecture of that household, of that generation, of those particular men, did not include fluency in emotional expression. You showed up, you worked, you provided, you did not narrate your interior, you did not perform pride or love or pain. You demonstrated it through presence, and then you moved on. My grandfather, George's father, never once told my father he was proud of him. I know this because my father told me once when I was about 12 and had asked why he never said it to us. He said, "My father never said it either, that's just not how we did it." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reporting the weather. I said, "But does that mean it's right?" He looked at me, he said, "It means it's how I know how to do it." And then he left the kitchen, and that conversation was over. I have thought about that exchange approximately 10,000 times in the 22 years since it happened. My mother, Carol, died when I was 19 and Dana was 16. This is relevant, not because her death explains everything, it doesn't, but because it reconfigured the family in ways that left marks. My mother was the one who said things. She was the translator in the household, the one who could take my father's silence and render it into something that felt like warmth, who could look at me after a hard day and say, "Your father is proud of you. He just doesn't know how to show it." When she died, the translation service ended. What was left was my father, 2 daughters, and the raw, unmediated silence. Dana is 31. She is 3 years younger than me and a full world different. Dana is warm where I am precise. She is expressive where I am measured. She speaks easily about feelings, laughs loudly, fills rooms with a social energy that I have never had and have always, and this is honest, quietly envied. Dana works in nonprofit administration. She coordinates community programs for an organization in Portland, Oregon, that provides educational support for low-income families. She is extraordinary at this work. She is the kind of person who runs toward the place where help is needed and simply begins helping, without fanfare, without a press release. My father understands Dana's work. He understands what it looks like. He can see the children she helps, can picture the programs she runs, can attend a dinner and hear a speech and watch a room respond to what she has built and understand it completely. He can be proud of it in real time, in public, with witnesses. My work happens in a lab. It happens at a cellular level, in sequences of data and protein interactions, and assay results and statistical models. The output, when there is an output, is a paper in a journal with a name he cannot pronounce, about a mechanism he cannot visualize, toward a therapy that may not exist for another decade. There is no dinner for this. There is no room that fills with applause. There is just the work. And me doing it. And him saying, "Good for you, Kira." I want to be fair to my father, because fairness is something I believe in even when it costs me, and sometimes especially then. He came to my PhD defense. He drove 4 hours from Baltimore to Cambridge in February, in weather that was technically inadvisable, and he sat in the front row of a seminar room at MIT while I presented 5 years of research to a committee, and he stayed for the whole thing. He did not understand a word of it, by his own later admission. But he stayed. He shook the hands of my committee members afterward. He said, to my advisor, and I was standing right there, "She works harder than anyone I've ever known." He said it about me. To someone else. Not to me. This is the pattern I have been living in. The praise exists. I am not inventing an indifferent man. The pride, I believe it is real, somewhere in him, but it moves in a specific direction, away from me and toward witnesses, as though he can feel it but cannot deliver it, as though there is something between him and me that reroutes the thing before it arrives. I spent a long time thinking this was my fault. I spent a long time thinking if I did more, published more, achieved more, the thing would finally reroute correctly. That was the 30 under 30 list. That was every paper. That was every grant. That was the waiting. The dinner was a community recognition event in Portland. Dana's organization had been nominated for an award, a Regional Nonprofit of the Year citation, given by a coalition of foundations in the Pacific Northwest. The dinner was held at a hotel ballroom in downtown Portland on a Friday in November. 200 people. Formal, a program, speeches. My father flew out for it. He flew from Baltimore to Portland, a 5-hour flight, to attend his younger daughter's award dinner. I want to be clear, I think this was right. I think he should have been there. I was glad he went. Dana deserved to have her father in that room. I was not there. I was in Boston. I had a grant deadline that week, the kind of deadline that does not bend, and I had sent Dana a gift and a card, and a voice message the morning of the event telling her I loved her and was proud of her and wished I could be there in person. She called me afterward from her car in the hotel parking garage. She told me about the award, the speech, the room. She sounded happy. She sounded, for a moment, like everything was simple. She did not tell me, that night, what our father had said. She called me the next day. She said she needed to tell me something, and she wasn't sure how. I said, "Just tell me." She said, "Dad said something last night. At the reception after the dinner. We were standing in a group, me, Dad, a few people from the organization, one of our board members. And someone said something nice about the work we do, and Dad he turned to the group and he said, 'This is why I am proud of my children.'" She paused. I said, "Okay." She said, "Kira," he was looking at me when he said it. I said, "Okay." She said, "He was looking at me, not at his phone, not at the ceiling, not generally around the room. He was looking at me." And I smiled because I didn't know what to do, and everyone around us smiled, and the moment moved on. "But Kira, I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning because I can't stop thinking about it." I said, "Why?" She said, Because I cannot remember in our entire lives Dad saying he was proud of you specifically. And you've given him so much more to be proud of than that's not, she stopped. She exhaled. I'm not saying my work doesn't matter. I'm saying you have 17 published papers and a research lab and a PhD from MIT, and he said he was proud of his children while looking at me. At my dinner. For my award. Silence on the line. I said, Dana. She said, yes. I said, I know. I have been sitting with what came after that sentence for a long time, because what came after was not what you might expect. I did not cry. I did not go into a spiral of rage or grief or self-pity. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways more devastating. What happened was that something settled. Like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for decades, not opening anything, just finally acknowledging the shape of the mechanism. Confirming it. Yes, this is the lock. This is what we're dealing with. Now you know exactly. I had always suspected the pattern. I had narrated it to myself in vague terms, explained it away in various directions. He doesn't understand your work. He shows love differently. He's doing his best. You're being too sensitive. I had held the suspicion at arm's length because it was too heavy to hold close and too painful to put down. Dana's phone call put it directly in my hands. And I held it. And I thought, okay, what do we do with this? I did not call my father that week. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was afraid, not because I was waiting for the feeling to pass, but because I knew, with the precision that I bring to everything I care about, that I only wanted to have this conversation once. I did not want a phone call where I could be managed, deflected, where the conversation could be ended with the physical act of hanging up. I did not want a text exchange where tone was invisible and misreading was easy. I wanted a room. I wanted a table. I wanted his face across from mine, with no exit route available to either of us. I called Dana. I said, when are you next going to be in Baltimore? She said, December for Christmas. I said, I'm coming too. We need to have a dinner, just the three of us. Sunday dinner, the way we used to. Dana was quiet for a moment. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to ask him a question. She said, what question? I said, I'm going to ask him to tell me what he's proud of, about me, specifically. A long pause. Dana said, Kira. I said, yes. She said, are you okay? I said, I'm going to be, I just need to ask the question first. I want to tell you what I did in the weeks between the phone call and the December dinner, because it matters. I went to my therapist. Her name is Dr. Valentina Cruz, and she has an office near Copley Square with good light and a cactus on the windowsill that she has kept alive for 11 years, which I consider evidence of reliable follow-through. I have been seeing her, on and off, for 6 years. We had done a lot of work around my father in those 6 years. A lot of work about approval and achievement, and the substitution of professional validation for the thing I actually wanted. I told her about the dinner, about Dana's call, about the sentence. She said, how did it land? I said, like confirmation. She said, of what? I said, of the thing I already knew but hadn't let myself fully know. She said, and now that you fully know it, what do you want? I said, I want to ask him directly. I want to sit across from him and ask him what he is proud of about me and listen to his answer. She said, what are you hoping the answer will be? I said, I'm a scientist. I don't go into experiments hoping for a specific result. I go in wanting to know what's actually true. She looked at me. She said, Kira. I said, yes. She said, you're not going in as a scientist. You're going in as a daughter. I sat with that for a moment. I said, I know. I'm using the scientist framing because it's the one that keeps me steady. She said, that's okay. Just know which one you are when you're sitting at the table. I said, I know which one I am. She said, then go ask your question. The Allen family Sunday dinner is a ritual that has existed since before I was born. My mother started it. She believed she said this explicitly more than once, that families that ate together regularly were harder to break, that the table was a kind of maintenance, a weekly calibration. She made the same things most Sundays: pot roast in the winter, chicken in the summer, always rice, always green beans, always the cornbread from the recipe she had learned from her own mother and never written down. After she died, my father kept the ritual. This surprised me. I had expected it to dissolve, expected the table to become simply functional, a place to eat rather than gather, but he kept it. He learned the pot roast. He learned the green beans. He never learned the cornbread, and so there is never cornbread now, and that absence is its own kind of grief that sits quietly at every Sunday dinner without being named. I arrived in Baltimore on a Friday evening, 2 days before the dinner. Dana flew in from Portland Saturday morning. We stayed at the house, my father's house, the house we grew up in, the house where our mother's things are still mostly where she left them, which is a whole other story for another time. Saturday was ordinary. We helped around the house. We watched a game with my father in the evening. We ordered pizza. My father was himself quiet, present in his particular way, asking practical questions. Had we eaten on the way in? Was the heat okay in our rooms? Did we need anything? He did not know what was coming on Sunday. Dana knew. I had told her. She was the only one who knew. That night, after my father had gone to bed, Dana came into my room and sat on the end of my bed the way she had done since we were children. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "I've been ready for about 22 years. She said, "What do you need from me tomorrow?" I said, "Stay, whatever happens, stay at the table, don't smooth it over, don't rescue him, don't rescue me, just stay." She said, "I can do that." I said, "I know you can." She said, "I love you, Kira." I said, "I love you too." She got up and went back to her room, and I lay in my childhood bed, looking at the ceiling I had looked at for the first 18 years of my life, and I did not sleep for a long time. Sunday dinner. Pot roast, rice, green beans, the absent cornbread, my father at the head of the table, Dana and I on either side, the same seats we have always occupied, the winter light going gray through the dining room windows at 4 o'clock. We ate. My father talked about a neighbor who was selling his house, about the Orioles' off-season moves, about a repair he needed to make to the gutters in the spring. Dana talked about a new program her organization was launching. I talked about a paper I was preparing for submission. My father nodded at the paper the way he always nods, present but not quite arrived. We cleared the plates. My father started to push back from the table. And I said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" He settled back. He said, "Sure." I said, "Dana told me what you said at her dinner last month." His face moved slightly, a recalibration. I said, "She told me that you said, 'This is why I am proud of my children,' and I've been thinking about that since she told me, and I want to ask you something directly." He said, "Okay." I said, "What are you proud of? About me, specifically, not Dana, not your children as a category, me, Kira." The dining room went very quiet. My father's hands were flat on the table in front of him. He looked at them briefly, then at me. He said, "I'm proud of all your accomplishments. The PhD, the research." I said, "Dad." He stopped. I said, "I know my resume, I've lived it. I'm not asking you to recite it back to me. I'm asking what you are proud of. When you think about me, not what I've done, but who I am, what makes you proud?" A silence. Not a comfortable silence. Not the silence of someone gathering their thoughts toward a ready answer. The silence of someone who has been asked to access a room they are not sure they know how to unlock. My father said, "You're very accomplished." I said, "That's not what I asked." He said, "Kira." I said, "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm asking you a specific question. I need you to try to answer it. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened next." I had steeled myself, in the weeks of preparation, against two possible responses. The first was defensiveness, the posture of a man who feels accused and responds by fortifying. "I've always been proud of you. I don't know what you want from me. Why are you doing this? I had prepared for this." I had a quiet, steady answer ready for it. I was not going to match his defensiveness with mine. I was going to stay exactly where I was. The second was deflection, the posture of a man who feels something but redirects it outward into practical concerns, into history, into the way things have always been done in this family. I show it differently. That's just how I am. I had prepared for this too. I had my follow-up question ready. But how do I know? How do I know if you can't say it? What I had not prepared for, what I had not allowed myself to fully imagine, was what actually happened. My father sat at the head of his table. He looked at me. And he could not answer. Not defensively, not in deflection, he simply could not find the words. I watched him search. I watched him open his mouth twice and close it. I watched something move across his face that I can only describe as the expression of a man looking for something he cannot find, in a place he has not looked in a very long time. And I sat. And I waited. Dana sat too. She did what I had asked. She did not rescue him. She did not rescue me. She sat at the table and was a witness. The clock on the sideboard counted the seconds audibly. We have never noticed that clock before. We noticed it now. My father said, after a silence that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer, "You never needed it." I said, "What?" He said, "My being proud. You were always going to do what you were going to do. From when you were small, Kira, you never looked to me to tell you if it was right. You did it." I sat with this. I said, "So you didn't say it because you thought I didn't need it?" He said, "I thought." He stopped. He started again. "You always seemed like you had it handled. Dana needed more. She'd come to me with things, problems, uncertainty. You never did, you just went ahead." I said, "Dad, I need you to hear what you just said." He looked at me. I said, "You're telling me that you withheld telling me you were proud of me because I seemed too capable, because I didn't appear to need it, because I went ahead and did things on my own." He said, "I didn't think of it as withholding." I said, "What did you think of it as?" He said, I thought you knew." And here is where something in me, very quietly, broke and opened at the same time. I said, "How would I know, Dad? How would I know something you never said?" He did not have an answer for this. I said, "I went ahead and did things on my own because that's what the situation required. Because there was no one handing me the blueprint. Because Mom died and you went quiet and I was 19 and the only way I knew how to keep going was to go. That is not the same as not needing anything. That is someone doing what they have to do." I said, "I needed you to say it. I have needed you to say it my entire life." And I built 17 papers and a research lab and a career in a field most people cannot even pronounce, and some part of every single one of them was for you. Because I kept thinking, this will be the one. This will be the thing that makes him say it. The words came out steady. I had not planned those exact words. I had not scripted this. But they were there, waiting. It turned out with perfect clarity, and they came out one at a time, each one placed. My father's face had changed. He was looking at me differently than he had ever looked at me. Dana made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite breathing. I looked at her briefly. Her eyes were wet. She was doing what I had asked, she was staying, she was present, she was not moving, but she was not made of stone and she was not going to pretend to be. My father said, "Kira." I said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't know, because I never said it directly, because in our family that's not how things were said. But I'm saying it now, I needed it, I need it." He said, "I am proud of you." I looked at him. He said, I don't always know how to say it. I don't always know what words to." He stopped. He looked at the table. My father never said it to me, and I told myself it didn't matter. And I think I passed that on. And I didn't mean to, but I think I did. I said, "I know about Grandpa, you told me once, when I was 12. He looked surprised. I said, "You said, that's just not how we did it. And I asked you if that meant it was right. Do you remember what you said?" He shook his head. I said, "You said, it means it's how I know how to do it." He was quiet. I said, "I've thought about that conversation my whole life, Dad, because that was the answer. That was the most honest thing you ever said to me about it. You weren't doing it because it was right. You were doing it because it was the only thing you knew." I said, "I needed you to know something different. There is a particular kind of crying that men of my father's generation do that is unlike any other. It is not performed. It is not comfortable. It is the crying of someone whose body is doing something their mind has not authorized and cannot stop, and it costs them something visible to let it happen." My father cried. Not loudly, not in a way that took over the room. Quietly at the head of the table with his hands still flat in front of him, the way he had been sitting for the last half hour. The tears came without a change in his posture. He did not cover his face. He did not leave the room. He sat there and let it happen. I had never seen my father cry. Not at my mother's funeral. Not at anything in 34 years. I sat across from him and held the moment in both hands because I did not know when another one would come, and I did not want to drop it. Dana said very quietly, "Daddy." He said without looking up, "I'm all right." But he was not all right, and we all knew it, and it was the most human thing I had ever seen him be. After my father had steadied, after the moment had moved through and settled into something calmer, after Dana had gotten up and come back with a glass of water for each of us, and sat back down without making a production of it, we talked. Not in the way we had been talking, not around things, not in the management of things. We talked. My father told me, and I need you to understand what it cost him to say this, a man of 62 who had been raised in the architecture of silence, that he had been proud of me since before I knew the word. That when I was 4 years old, I had corrected his spelling on a grocery list, and he had thought, "Something is different about this one." That when I got into every college, I applied to he had called his own brother from the car, because he could not keep it inside, but did not know how to bring it home. That when I defended my PhD, he had understood nothing and loved every minute of it, because I was standing in front of a room of experts, and holding my own. He said, "I called Dennis from the parking lot when I left Cambridge. You were still inside with your committee." Dennis is his older brother, my uncle Dennis. He called his brother from a parking lot in February in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to tell him his daughter had just defended her dissertation. And he could not walk back inside and tell me. I said, "Why couldn't you say it to me?" He said, "I don't know, I think when I try to say it directly, I lose the words. They go, I feel it and then I go to say it and it's not there." I said, "Then we're going to practice." He looked up. I said, "I'm not being glib, I mean it. You're 62, I'm 34, we have time. And I need you to practice saying it to me directly, not to your brother, not to my committee, not to a room of strangers at Dana's dinner, to me." He said, "All right." I said, "Right now, say something. One thing that you're proud of about me." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "You came home and asked me this question. 34 years old, sat across from me at this table and asked me, and didn't flinch." He said, "I am proud of that." It was not the words I had spent a lifetime waiting for, exactly. It was something stranger and more specific, and in some ways more real. I said, "Thank you." He said, "I mean it." I said, "I know." Dana said, at some point in the evening, after the conversation had gentled, after we had moved back to the kitchen, and there was tea on the stove and the dining room was behind us, something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "I used to feel guilty for being the one he talked to, for being the one he showed up for in the way he knew how to show up. I felt like I was getting something you deserved." I said, "It's not your fault." She said, "I know, but I felt it anyway, and that's why I called you. After the dinner, I couldn't not tell you. It felt like I was holding something that was yours." I said, "It was never yours to carry, and you were right to put it down." She said, "Do you forgive him?" I said, "That's not quite the right question." She said, "What's the right question?" I thought about it. I said, "The question is whether we can build something from here. Forgiveness is about the past. I'm more interested in what comes next." My father was in the other room. Whether he heard this, I don't know. But Dana nodded like she understood it completely. I am a research scientist. I work in a field where progress is measured in millimeters, where the distance between a hypothesis and a conclusion can be measured in years, where breakthroughs are almost always the accumulation of very small advances over a very long time. I am used to waiting. I am used to the patience required when the change you need is cellular, invisible to the eye, happening beneath the surface, only measurable in aggregate over time. My relationship with my father, I have come to understand, is a research project of the longest duration. The hypothesis that he is capable of expressing what he feels. The evidence before that Sunday, mixed, present but insufficient, correlational rather than direct. The Sunday dinner, a controlled experiment, a direct question in a contained environment, consistent conditions, one variable introduced. The result, inconclusive in the best possible way. Not yes, he can do it easily. Not no, he cannot do it at all. But it is there, it exists, it cost him something to produce, and it is producible. That is a result worth building on. 3 weeks after the dinner, my father called me. Not about anything practical, not about the house or the gutters or a family logistics question. He called on a Thursday evening and said he had been reading about pancreatic cancer research. He had looked it up online, which I know because he asked me about a specific mechanism in a way that only makes sense if you have read a very particular kind of layperson's article, and he wanted to know how the work was going. I told him about the biomarker study, about what we were looking at and what it might mean and how many years away a clinical application might realistically be. I spoke to him the way I speak to a curious, intelligent non-specialist, which is with more patience and more imagery than I use with my team, but without condescension. He listened. He asked 2 questions that were good questions. He said at the end, "This is important work." I said, "I know." He said, "I mean it. What you're doing, if it works out, that changes things for people." I said, "That's the goal." A pause. He said, "I'm glad you're doing it." It was not "I am proud of you." But it was adjacent. It was the direction of it. It was a man of 62, raised in the architecture of silence, finding the steps that lead toward the room where the right words live. I counted it. I have a colleague, a postdoc in my lab, brilliant, 26 years old, already writing like a senior researcher, who told me once that she doesn't understand why people spend so much time wanting things from their parents when they're adults. She said, "At some point you just have to become your own source." I understand the impulse behind that. I have spent years trying to live it. But I want to say something about what it actually costs, because I think we are not always honest about it. Becoming your own source is a survival strategy. It is what you do when the original source is unavailable, when they are gone, or incapable, or so far away from what you need that waiting is its own kind of self-harm. You learn to generate the thing internally. You build the career, the credential, the life from the inside out. You become, by necessity, someone who does not require the external validation. And it is real, it works. You can live that way. I lived that way for 34 years. But it does not actually replace the thing. It substitutes for it, and substitution is not the same as fulfillment. There is always the original need, underneath the construction of self-sufficiency, still waiting, still counting, still wondering if this will be the thing, the paper, the grant, the 30 under 30 list, that finally roots the right words from the right mouth in the right direction. I am not telling you to go ask your parent the question I asked mine. I am not telling you that it will go the way mine went. I am not promising resolution, or the particular kind of crying I watched my father do at his dining room table in December. I am telling you that the question itself, the direct, named, patient, specific question, is available to you, and that asking it is not weakness. It is not neediness. It is not a regression to childhood or an abdication of the self-sufficiency you have so carefully built. It is a scientist walking into the room with the right hypothesis and running the experiment. It is a daughter sitting down at the table. It is 34 years of waiting, converted at last into a single clear sentence. Tell me specifically, what are you proud of about me? My father and I talk more now than we ever have. Not frequently, he is not a frequent caller, and I am not either, and we are not going to become people we are not. But when we talk, something is different. Something has been named that cannot be unnamed. I asked him the question and he tried to answer it, and in the trying, in the searching and the silence and the unexpected crying, and the parking lot in Cambridge he told me about, something was established between us that had not been established before. He knows that I needed it. I know that it costs him something to give it. We are both, now, working with full information. That is the most honest foundation I have ever stood on with him in my life. Dana and I talk about it sometimes, not obsessively, not in a way that pickles the wound. But we come back to it occasionally, the way you come back to a piece of research that changed how you see the field. She said once, "Do you think he would have gotten there eventually, on his own?" I thought about it. I said, "No." She said, "Me neither." I said, "He needed the question. He'd been waiting for permission to try, and he didn't know it." She said, "And you gave him permission." I said, "I gave us both permission." The last thing I want to say is about Dana. She could have not told me. She could have let that moment at the reception dinner live and die in that hotel ballroom in Portland, and carried it quietly, and decided that it wasn't her business, or that telling me would only hurt me, or that the right thing to do was to protect me from the specific shape of the wound. She told me instead. Because she trusted that I could hold it. Because she believed that I deserved to know the truth about the room I had been living in. Because she is my sister, and she called me from a parking garage the morning after her own award dinner to put something down that wasn't hers to carry. That is love. Not the managed kind, not the kind that edits itself for your comfort, the kind that trusts you with the real thing. I have that. Whatever else my family is, whatever the silences have cost, whatever the Sunday dinners have held that was never named, whatever the years of good for you instead of I am proud have accumulated into, I have a sister who called me from a parking garage and told me the truth. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal.